welcoming to the show one of the greatest singers of our generation, Mr. Jay Buchanan of Rival Sons. How are you, my brother?
That's very kind of you to say.
Dude, your voice is incredible.
Good. Thanks, Scott.
Incredible. I've been sitting with the music for like the last few months, and man, you made a monster record, so I want to get into that. The record is incredible. It's coming out soon, I think June 2nd.
June 2nd, Darkfighter drops on Atlantic Low Country Sound, you know.
So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the next new record even, which is coming out, so Lightbringer. But first, I want to get into your whole history, your path in life, your journey, and kind of how this all began, how you started back in the day. I think you grew up in Long Beach.
Well, you know, I moved to Long Beach after high school. I'm actually from a really small mountain town, not too far from here. You know, you see the mountains are covered with snow right now. So you see the tall one.
Yeah.
That's Mount Baldy. And so right on the back side of that, up near the top, is a little mountain town called Wrightwood. So if you ski or snowboard, mountain highs up there. But I grew up there, you know, very, very small town.
And tell me about your upbringing, like what it was that made you fall in love with music early on, and were your parents into music?
You know, by this time I've tried to answer that question so many different times, and every time I dig into it, there's something new for me to discover.
Yeah.
You know, something new for me to reveal. Music is just one of those things. It was never not there. You know, like my mom sang in the house. My pop was a musician. They always had jam sessions and stuff like that, and parties at the house. And if the parties weren't at our house, most often they were at someone else's house. You know, back in my early years, because my parents got religion right about the time I was 4 or 5. You know, that whole like evangelical sweep that hit the nation just before Reagan came into power.
Because you grew up Christian, or you grew up
Pentecostal. You know, so but before they got religion, it was parties and like just really good times, and it was just constant music. So music was one of those. There's nothing else like it. And when I go back to being a child, it just seemed as natural as anything else. I thought everybody played music. I thought everybody's parents jammed. I thought it was that. So when I would make friends at the beach or meet new kids, I'd be like, oh, hey, so what instrument does your pop play?
It was like everyone had to play music.
Yeah, I just thought everybody played music because it's like, it's such an easy, it's like an easy communication. And when music occupies a really certain place, because music always sounded like honesty to me, you know, like that's the real truth. Because when people start talking, they'll try to sell you something, or they can be lying or whatever. But music, when they start singing, that is the honest. They can't lie because you'll hear it.
Yeah.
You know?
And early on, it seems like singer-songwriters were a big part of your makeup musically. I think Joni Mitchell.
Oh, there's no doubt.
Van Morrison.
Uh-huh.
So talk to me about kind of your earlier influences, and later on, obviously, the British Invasion. And it's funny because the band is this interesting combination of, like, for me, the British Invasion, some soul, some Motown, a lot of American roots too, but it's this amazing kind of combination of music. So musically, where did it all come from for you?
Well, I think first and foremost, you know, growing up Pentecostal, and mind you, that was probably like 5-6 years. And then my parents just kind of backed off and wanted to step away from churching, and they're still very, you know, religious and God-fearing people and within their own home. But the social aspect of it, you know, when they were doing all of that, I was introduced to an environment very early on where adults, grandparents, everybody, like they kind of just like lost their shit every Sunday, and there'd be tears, people speaking in tongues, and like just losing it, man. Losing it.
I can't even imagine what that would be
being
like.
a little kid watching adults completely surrender themselves, and you know, they would do like these altar calls where people would, I guess it's kind of like a confession, but it's like rededicating themselves, you know, and you just watch adults just act like you would see the child in the adult. And I know that's really wild, But for me, looking back at that, it was such a beautiful thing because it gave me a context for what adults were. Adults are just children that got older, and they still have regrets. They make mistakes. I never grew up in an environment where I saw adults or authority figures as infallible in any way. I saw them as very vulnerable people.
What is your relationship with religion now that you've kind of grown up that way, by the way?
Oh, I think that I have sought, I've gone through a lot of different religions, man. I mean, really deep down the rabbit hole. I think that for me, I have sought to understand what creation is, universally, the idea of God or a creator or all of these things. I've been through enough things in my life and I have witnessed enough things to know there's certainly something at play there.
Yeah.
And I think from a young age, I knew that I was given an advantage. I was given a voice that people told me they liked to hear. And I think that happened really early on. And so that I think I got to a certain age and I wanted to do what I could as a person. And this is really going to sound very hippie, but I think that I wanted to seek God in return or whatever that creative force is. I wanted to seek that and to have a healthy relationship with that. And at the same time, try to be ethical with my art so that it's kind of like a Hippocratic artistic oath.
Yeah.
Artists are either the kind that are just going to be selfish and they're going to do the look at me and all eyes on me, or I see music as a vehicle for growth. And I see it as a salve for just about anything. It heals wounds and it does all of this different stuff. But I think that I sought to try to live that way in order to earn back what I was given,
It's interesting. So early on, you had a couple of strange jobs. I think I read, Jay, that you worked at a mortuary.
I did. I worked at a mortuary.
What was that like?
It was probably the best job I've ever had, I can't call music a job.
Yeah.
It's literally playing. I play.
I don't know if I have the stomach to work at a mortuary, though. I feel like that would be a really tough place because I guess in a way, you're right. I mean, you're around a lot of love because a lot of people there are sort of embracing the family member or whoever it may be, but you're also dealing with death too. So in a way, I think it'd be really hard for me to be around that. But for you, I guess it was sort of inspirational in a way.
I think it was certainly inspirational. I think that, when I was in high school, I got introduced to Platonic philosophy. And then that led to many other philosophies. But that was something that finally clicked for me because it was the language of real thought and truly seeing thoughts and, all the way until thoughts or viewpoints were distilled and seeing things through to the end. And that was so attractive to me. But from there, I jumped to Eastern philosophy. And then, your late teens, you get all doped up on the beat poets, and just the whole thing. And then you get that Eastern mysticism and all of that. And I think that the relationship with reading the Tibetan book of living and dying and all of that stuff, Meister Eckhart, and trying to understand what death is in our vernacular. Because I remember being a teenager, a late teenager, right? And our death reminders in Western culture, it's so evident.
Yeah.
That aging and death is it's taboo, right? And so for me, I was looking at that going well, this doesn't make sense. How can a quote unquote Christian culture be so afraid of death when they walk around professing that there's a promised land right on the other side? What's going on here? Right. I think everybody's losing their goddamn minds. So anyways, my relationship with trying to understand those things at a young age, and, I was definitely very, very naive, but you do what you can.
It's funny because there's a song on your new record, Nobody Wants to Die, which is a banger, an amazing song, by the way, but it ties right into what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Philosophically, it ties into all the writings you were speaking about, but it is just a straightforward, rock song, but the message behind it is a lot about that, right?
The message, I'm going to jump back just really quickly, of working at a mortuary, right? I remember I was managing this restaurant when I was like 21, and I didn't want to do that. And I had this one customer in, and one day, he would come in the morning, get some coffee, and I'd go talk to him for a little bit. His name was Mike Ross. And I said, Mike, so what do you do? And he tells me. And he managed all of these different mortuaries. And then less than a month later, I hit him up and I said, I want to come work for you. And he's like, what? You want to do what? I'm like, yeah, man, that actually sounds really romantic. And to be there helping people in their hard time and driving the hearse and, the whole thing. It was like the best job I ever had because I was around something that was true.
Right.
It's true. Now, whether you want to look away or not, what is going on that day, somebody passed.
Yeah.
And now you're there. And I would sit through these fantastic eulogies, incredible,
I guess it's the same when people celebrate life, right? I was at a funeral celebration, I would say 3 years ago, where Kiss performed.
Yeah.
And I was like, I've never been to usually go to funerals and people are very sullen. And I was like, this is actually, someone passed away and they hired Kiss to perform. This is definitely the strangest kind of funeral celebration. But the idea of celebrating someone's life is also pretty fascinating and interesting. And you looked at it from the opposite perspective, which is let's embrace this and let's talk about the love. And as opposed to, you're right, I'm probably one of those look away kind of people where, it's just, it's hard. You want to celebrate their lives, but it's also sad in a way.
Well, I mean, it's inevitable. So to treat it as sad or any of those things, I just lost my uncle that I was closest with in my whole life. He just died yesterday.
Wow, sorry about that.
I appreciate that. And, but I mean, it's also death is that's the other side of the bookshelf that's holding the books up. You know what I mean?
True.
It's that's just, there's no way around it. And to try to, scorn the inevitable, if you're going to treat birth as a gift, you've got to treat death the same way.
No question. So let's talk about how you go from working in this mortuary, eventually writing songs, meeting the other guys in the band. I know there's a MySpace history, which some people talk about.
Oh, yeah. I don't want to talk about that. That's just the real origin story is in, Wikipedia. I was notified about. I was like, wow, I was talking about MySpace or whatever. But you go by your resources.
Sure.
Really, the band got together. I had a very healthy career as a singer-songwriter, and I play here in town in L.A. But I don't, my band, we never really got bigger than selling out the Troubadour, right? So it's that's good, but
there's a lot more to life.
Yeah, and touring coast to coast, did all of that and was doing really well. But I broke that band up because I was feeling, and this was in 06, I was feeling creatively that I needed to completely shed my skin and approach the art in a way that was going to be closer to the bone for me. And the responsibility of having a band of people that I loved so much, it's when you're going to be in a band and you cut your teeth on the same bones together and you go through so much. The idea of splitting a band up is, man, it's heartbreaking, right? But I knew that I needed to do that because I needed to. I remember I took the hard drive with our whole email list and everything, broke it, and just burned everything. And I just sort of one of those Cortez, burn your ships at the shore, got to go in. And everybody told me it was career suicide, but I knew that I needed to completely change the way that I was approaching things, so that I'd play I'd go play at the Hotel Cafe, and just really experimenting on what I was going to be doing, putting different bands together. And
did you have labels coming down to check you out at that point?
Yeah, independent labels. But at that time, I knew that I didn't want to link up with anything because I was in a time of very, very intense growth and rebirth, and so that wasn't the time to lock arms with an end product, because they'll inevitably try to shape you, and you'll try to shape yourself, if you're at the end of the story first, which is perfectly fine if you're writing a screenplay.
And this is what, 2008, 2009?
Yeah, that was lasting through 2006, 2007, and then I was writing and producing, I was recording my magnum opus at that time, and that was the result of this new approach to songwriting and music. And I was just finishing this record, and then our drummer, Michael Miley, who I had known since like 99, and he had played in bands that I had. He hits me up out of nowhere and says, you know, hey, have you checked out my band? And he would send me emails, but they were always, you know, guys with like double neck guitars and like bell bottoms and stuff like that. And I'm just going like, yeah, man. Yeah, I checked you guys. I hadn't listened to anything. Like, yeah, I checked you guys out. I keep meaning to get to a show, you know, but he goes, listen, my guitar player saw a video of you and he just won't let up. You know, and I said, you know, he said, would you consider being in our band? I said, no, I don't want to be in your rock and roll band, you know.
Because at that point also you were thinking singer-songwriter.
I was just thinking like, look, rock and roll, when it's done right, it takes you somewhere.
Yeah.
But when it's done wrong, it's just a bunch of posturing dickheads. And you see it and you go like, oh man, that turns me off. But when you see, like, it has to be the right people doing it the right way. And I'm not purporting to claim that we're doing it the right way, that I'm doing it the right way at all.
But I can say, you are.
I'm just doing it the way that I can do it, you know. But for me, I was just turned off by so much of what was being considered rock and rock and roll. I had grown up like on the classics, and I had grown up very heavily on the blues, like big time. And so, you know, everything from the Blues Breakers and the Jeff Beck, like the Truth album, and the early Zeppelin and the Stones and the Kinks and like that type of stuff, that was good. But even a lot of that was shit too, you know, that I would hear on these records like, oh man, I don't know.
You're going back to Robert Johnson, some of the
yeah,
really
for
early...
me, you know, going back and listening to Lead Belly and like Blind Willie Johnson. Yeah, like Robert Johnson was great, and that was probably like the first that I got. Had the collection, like the full tapes, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, so what I did is Miley just said, well, okay, well, whatever, I understand, but can you just at least call him because he's not going to get off my back. So I called him and we start talking about the blues, and Scott talked a really good game about the blues. So I'm like, well, wait a minute.
Maybe this guy's the real deal.
Wait a minute. So then I just said, like, look, let's get together and jam. I'm just thinking, just play some shows around town. I'm really busy getting this other thing off the ground. Like, I'm relaunching everything. And I just thought, this will be fun. You know, maybe a couple nights out of the month, go and just, I don't know, kick your heels up and play some rock and drink some beers. That sounds fun. Oh my God, it took off like a rocket.
You got together and it was magic.
Well, yeah, we got together in a room and we basically just jammed, you know, like they had some music that they had recorded already, and they had another guy, and so I listened to one or two of their songs and roughly learned that, but then we just freeformed. The next thing you know, it's like 2 hours later, we walk outside and it's like, yeah, I guess I got to do this, you know, and because it was just so evident. Like, it would be a shame to not make music together. And then
did you go back, by the way, and listen to some of their earlier recordings at that point?
Well, no, I mean, for them, they just had the one album that hadn't come out yet, you know, and it was, you know, there were some good songs on there that I thought were good songs, and there was a bunch of stuff that I didn't really relate to, but like I jumped into the studio and retracked the vocals, which was wild for me. I've never done that. I'm not sing somebody else's songs or whatever, but I just looked at it and went like, well, they worked really hard on this record, and it's a good record. It'd be a shame to just let it die. And plus, we need a promotional tool. You know, if we're going to play gigs, we need to be able to pass out albums.
Yeah. So this is 2009. Before the fire.
late 2008, and then
you start working with Dave Kobb.
Yeah, start
still
working
to this
with
day,
Dave
by the way.
Yeah. Every record with Dave. You know, he's absolutely family.
Let's talk about, by the way, your relationship with Dave. If people don't know, Dave is one of the greatest producers right now in music, and you have not worked with anyone else, to my knowledge, right? So this is like 8 albums in working with them.
Yeah, Rival Sons, I mean, Yeah. We haven't worked with anyone else. And the reason, I mean, like Dave is he's family. He's a very, very close friend of mine. And, he's the reason that I moved out to Nashville in the first place. Because he's like, he was telling me, I'm going to build this empire. He's like, come out. And he did, and he's just incredible. A very natural approach, very relaxed, very... he doesn't have a sound. I don't feel like there's a Dave Kobb sound. He's there to serve the artist, and a fairly transparent producer that way. Where like other producers, they'll get in there and they'll just wrestle it to the ground and make it have that that certain sound. But for him, he's really about serving the artist and just capturing an honest snapshot of where they're at.
It's also pretty interesting because those earlier records were very spontaneous.
Very
spontaneous. And I think you just went into the studio and you basically created music. I think there were some ideas, but you really didn't pre-plan any of those records, right?
Well, with the first 3-4 records that we did, it was a conscious decision. We went in there with nothing. And just start writing every day. And for me as a lyric writer, and I'll write complete songs, I'll write guitars, I'll write everything. I'm used to doing that. But, like my writing partner, Scott Holiday, you have to pass the wheel back and forth. You have to do that because we're talking about people's identity and a collective identity for the band. And we would get into the studio in those early records and just write. And record. We'd write a song and record it that day. And for me, I try to write good lyrics. I do the best that I'm capable of. I try to write honestly. I mean, it would have me in the fetal position, waking up in the morning in the shower, just going like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I don't know where any of this is going to come from. And everybody's going to be looking at me. What do you got, Jay? I don't know. That's not what I got to do. Isn't like writing a quick part or a quick line. It's very, very different. It's music and lyrics, and like I don't know what I'm going to do. But it was one of those things to where just like stretching yourself over the anvil over and over and hammering it out. It became one of those things where it was about just staying in the ring. Stay in the ring, and don't get thrown out, don't get knocked down. Just stay in the ring. And you're going to write something. You're going to produce something. And then developing the instincts more and more of doing that so many times made it like, oh, yeah, you can actually. I think we can do this. We don't make records like that anymore. I think it took years off my life.
It's interesting, though, when you listen to a record like Pressure and Time, though, it still sounds so relevant today. And I think when you listen to those, I'm sure you don't listen to those records on a daily basis, but if you do revisit those records, because I know you just finished the tour where you played, your first record in its entirety, how do you feel about that music now when you kind of reflect back on it?
That's a good question. When we went coast to coast in 21. And we played the Pressure and Time record in its entirety. Along with once we got that done, we did the greatest hits and the singles after that. But it was a really interesting situation, Scott, because at that time we were already neck deep in the Darkfighter record and Lightbringer. With the two albums that we have coming out this year.
So it's like the old and the new. This
complete, and we completely reinvented our approach to writing with this current music. So to be fully immersed in trying to create this, we're going to take a break and we're going to put on our old Letterman's jacket from high school and see if it still fits, and get out there and play this music that we created, 12 years ago now. And we're going to relive that. And it's such a trip because the band has only gotten better, and so our approach to, the stagecraft and actually communicating and playing these songs certainly gives you an advantage. But for me, it was very interesting of going, okay, I wrote this. I don't really feel that way so much anymore, but that's the way the song goes. And then this other song would come up and I'd go, oh man, that seems like a pretty trite song. A little bit of Moon, Spoon, and June there, and just these different things. You're naturally going to be critical, but I think that by the end of the tour, because we did it in Europe too. By the end of the tour, it was like, okay, I think we're good on that. It's a great album, and it's really great to hear you say, that it still has a relevance to it. But yeah, it's trippy. That's like the burden that you have. The more you create, the more moss you accumulate, and that's part of your identity. And for me, typically, I tend to never want to look back because it's all about who you are right now.
By the way, it's probably really hard to pick out a great set list because you have so many great songs.
It's murder.
It's probably like an hour discussion between or do you just go out there and wing it? Are you?
No, we'll go out there for the most part. I think that I'll leave that stuff to Scott because he has so many guitar changes, and he's manning all of this. His effects situation. That for him, if I go, oh, well, we should do this song right after that song, he's like, dude, that's a totally different guitar. Right. And you're going to
tune down a key.
My tech is going to kill himself like in between these two songs. So,
well, taking it back just a moment, we were just talking, Jay. So I think 2010, you signed to Earache Records. Talk to me a little bit about your relationship with the quote unquote the industry at this point, because now I think you bought back the masters and the rights. And for a band like yourselves, owning your music now, signing to an indie label early on, but wanting that, because ultimately you connected with Atlantic too, right? Yeah. Talk to me about kind of your relationship with the industry at this point and how it is for you.
Well, I think, all through the 2000s and everything, any record deal that I had ever signed was always independent. Now, I was courted by and, thought about dancing with the devil earlier on. But the industry was in such a state of flux because the internet was just taken over, and it was a weird situation. And so taking and working, taking independent deals and working with independent labels always gave me freedom. You have freedom because you're not you aren't beholden to a bunch of people that you just don't even know who they are, So for us, we were looking at it when Earache Records came knocking. It was really a trip because I had never heard of Earache Records, but they were a stalwart in the death metal scene. I wasn't familiar with death metal at all. Not at all.
I didn't scary music. By the way.
didn't. Well, it seems scary. I listened to it, and it certainly sounds like a soundtrack to
murder.
A life I am very unfamiliar with. We take it easy in Southern California.
Yeah. You ever watch any of those documentaries on the black metal scene from Norway? It's
of course, No Mayhem, and I know
stuff.
some of those guys, and but what I didn't know, and the rest of the band too, is the death metal community is filled with amazing people.
Except for Mayhem. Maybe.
Well. Anybody that yes, people that are going to cause harm to other people, of course. But that's you have very, very poor decisions wrapped up in there, and you have a lot of trauma that caused them to want to live that way or burn down churches. I don't know.
But some of them are good people, I guess.
Yes, I know. I know some of them, and they are certainly good people. Yeah. But so we were very unfamiliar with this, but then. By signing with Earache Records, and they're out of Nottingham in the UK, by signing with them, we were suddenly in league with all of these metal festivals, and not just death metal, but just metal in general. And like the first European tour that we ever went on, we were first of three. It was us, Queensryche, and Judas Priest.
I mean...
It was wild for us because we didn't know what to expect because we recognized wow, doesn't really feel like our scene, but we were also being short-sighted.
Were you into any of those bands growing up at all? Because I know
a little bit of Priest.
Yeah,
Queensryche was never necessary. I didn't have any albums. Yeah, but Priest is. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Rob
Halford's great.
Yes, of course. Yeah. But we didn't know what to expect because, like I said, naively we were looking at it. We weren't drawing where we were on the family tree and where they were. Because the truth is we're an offshoot. We are part of that lineage, you know. And our Digby Pearson, who the owner and the operator of Earache Records, what he had said is he said, you guys are part of that lineage because you make the rock and roll music that came just before they came on.
True.
You guys are playing, so that's why this works. That's why it makes sense. You are in that family. You just don't realize it. And it was like, you know. So then going over there and looking at it that way, it made so much more sense, you know. And subsequently playing with so many other metal bands and metal festivals and all of that, like, okay, well, we're the only rock and roll band, you know, that isn't like a cover band.
And now word from a new friend of the show. Fellas, do you feel like you might want to spice things up in the bedroom? Blue Chew tablets, just for fun, will bring that added spice and fun back into your bedroom. What's a Blue Chew tablet, you say? It's a chewable tablet with the same active ingredient as Viagra and Cialis. The difference is it costs just a fraction, it's delicious, and you don't have to deal with going to the doctors and having that awkward conversation with them. It's as easy as going online, speaking to a medical professional, and they send them your way. Use my code, that's LIPPS, LIPS, for a free month supply. Just go to bluechew.com. You pay only $5 for shipping. Do yourself a favor, bring the fun back in your bedroom, and now, back to the show. Yeah, what are some of your recollections of some of those early van tours and being on the road in the U.S. and Europe? And it's just some great stories about that time period for you.
You know, I think when you're going through that stuff, I think that if you just keep it in mind, because it can be really, really grueling.
Yeah.
You know, and it is. I mean, it is really grueling. You know, the no sleep early on, you don't have a crew. And you're driving and you're doing all of this stuff, but that's what bands do. So it's like to say like, oh, it's grueling and it was just so rough. Like, man, so many people are going to be listening to this and they're in a van. They know exactly what I'm talking about. It's just part of the ride. It's a very, very necessary part of. It's part of the timeline of any professional musician.
Now, do you romanticize about this time period, or do you look at it like, you know what, we cut our teeth, but, you know, I'm happy that we're at where we're at now?
Well, I think that wherever you're at, I think that it's very important to recognize it as necessary.
Yeah. If
you look at it and you're scorning it the whole time, you're just going to be miserable. And I've toured with people like that are malcontents. They want something before they've earned it. You know, they want to be treated a certain way, or they want more respect, or they want more adoration before they've earned anything. And that's a real drag to be around, and it definitely makes everything more difficult for not only them, but like just for the group. So I think that I've always been a big one with like, this is where we're at. If we're playing to 20 people, if we're playing to 5 people and a bartender, let's play to 2,000 people.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing. And that was kind of our thing right out of the gate. We're up there to play for ourselves. The audience, if there's an audience, great. Because it's the whole like, you will be so demoralized if you play that game. I can't sit here and tell you like, oh, it's all about ego. No, it's not. It's not just ego. That's a practical thing. You don't want to be out here playing to nobody.
Were there early gigs that you were playing for 5 people in a bar?
Oh, it happened. It really happened. It really happened when we began touring in the U.S. and we were hitting these territories. I remember playing like Iowa City, right. And we literally, it was like us and, you know, Jessica Von Rabbit from out in the desert, right. And she was out there too, and we both played to nobody, like 3 people, and we just sat there and talked and had some drinks and made a friend, but. It happens, you know. Same thing happened in Cleveland at the like Agora Ballroom, you know, an old Alan Freed place, where you just go like, we're here, let's play every night. Let's play like it's the last time we're going to be able to do it, and just play for each other. But so that happened once we began touring here in L.A. Funny enough, like we played. Our first show was down in Orange County at my buddy's old club. It was called the Gypsy Lounge in Lake Forest. That was our first show. Second show was at the the Derby over here.
Sure.
And I think the Derby's gone now.
Yeah.
So then that was at the Derby. And then our third show was at the Roxy. And people came, and we let people know. So then that packed out. The very next day, my buddy Joe Rinaldi hit me up. And Joe was doing the booking across the street over the House of Blues, when the House of Blues was still here. And he's like, Jay, what's up? What's up with your band? I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, I heard that there's like some super band. I'm like, come on, man, what are you talking about? And he's like, no. And he goes, I have a proposition for you. All right. And he says, I'm going to give you tickets and I'm going to pay you to play at the House of Blues. I'll give you all the tickets you want. And you give it to all your friends. Yeah, Joe, that sounds great, man. So then for us,
because those are like the early pay to play days, I believe, right?
Well, yeah, we never did that. You can be over at that's why I've never played the Whiskey in my life.
It's strange. People don't know that you'd have to actually buy a certain amount of tickets to perform there, which is a very strange concept, but I guess they just didn't want to lose their ass early on with a lot of bands that would think they could draw and they couldn't draw, so they were just covering their expenses.
I get it, but hey, look, for a club owner, I understand that. I'm a business owner as well. But for me, the idea of paying to play was at odds with the very nature of what art and music is, because it's very restrictive for these bands. So you get, around here, like I said, like the Whiskey, they get all of these bands that are coming in from the Inland Empire who just want to play the world famous Whiskey. Right. And these bands come in and they lose their shirts because they can't bring their buddies out. And so it's like it's a really, really vicious cycle, But there are a lot of clubs that I never played specifically because of that. But the House of Blues, Joe Rinaldi gave us a huge leg up. So thank you, Joe. And we packed it out. It was like the Daylights and a couple other bands played, but we got there and immediately, Azoff Music Management came. Tom Consolo picked us up, Brett Steinberg arranged all of that from CAA. And
so it happened fairly quickly.
It happened. We had a manager and we had representation, everything within 5 gigs.
Amazing.
That doesn't make any sense. It's too crazy. So then that took off like a rocket, and it was like, okay, now we're going to plan, we start getting everything, and Tom did a really, really great job, excellent manager, in, getting us exposure and introducing us to people. And then, we licensed a song to the Indy car race, for Izod. And that gave us a ton of exposure. Next thing we know, we're the first band to ever play out on the bricks, for Carb Day in Indianapolis. Amazing. At the track. And it's just insane thing. It all happened really, really fast. Far faster than I thought it was going to.
In 2011, you released could be, I guess, your seminal record, Pressure in Time. One of the great rock records of the last 10, 15 years. So again, just reflecting back on that record, it's such a great record. And you just went out, like we said, when you did it in its entirety. How do you feel about just the state of where your music is going now? Because now you're taking 2 or 3 years to write a record, right? You talk about the new record a little bit, Darkfighter. This record, I think it's 4 years between this record and your last record, right?
Well, yeah, Feral Roots came out in 19. And then we were having the best professional year, of our career. That album did great. We got a #1 with the song "Do Your Worst." So we got a #1 at rock radio. We got 2 Grammy nominations.
Incredible.
So it's like we're doing the whole thing. And it was auspicious, because we get to the ceremony. It's like, okay, so we're here. I had a real nice suit made and got tickets for my parents and all of that. And then we're there over at Staples Center. And I find out on the red carpet when we were doing interviews and all of that, that Kobe, and that Kobe and had passed, and that whole situation, what? Mm. So I'm on camera. Wait, what happened? So then we're at the Staples Center having an award show.
Almost
And
seems
Kobe.
That's so heavy.
Kobe Bryant is gone. So we're there, and it threw this real
Dark cloud.
real dark cloud, man. If it were anywhere else on the face of the earth, it wouldn't have been that way.
Yeah.
But we're right there. So then, hang out for a bit. We didn't win the awards, but to be nominated, crazy, But then we go outside, I remember that night, and just trying to get back to, cars and all of that. There are people holding like a candlelight vigil for Kobe. And here we are, coming through, dressed to the nines, cutting through there. It was a terrible situation, But it was really trippy because that happened. And then next thing you knew, the shutdown happened. So it was like, okay, ramp up, and down.
Pause.
Well, yeah, pause, and then nobody works, nobody tours. And so I think that very quickly, within a couple of months after okay, well, this tour is going to get canceled because nobody can do anything. And then it was like, okay, everybody just stay in your house for 2 weeks. Is that cool? Yeah.
What about 3 years?
Yeah. So we immediately began work on the next record, and we had to work remotely. So Scott and I were passing songs back and forth, and we had time, so we took time. And so the crazy thing about that is we never intended to take that long making a record. It's actually ridiculous.
By the way, you're also not the kind of band that can do a record over Zoom. You have to get in a room.
No, yeah,
you have
exactly.
to play. I don't feel there's any part of you. There's so many artists that I interview. We were sending some files back and forth. That's not right.
Yeah, that's not us. Certainly, it's about the kinetic energy and the the symbiotic nature of the way we play when we're together. But we took time because we had time. But see, it also works this way through the shutdown and everything that was happening. First you have a virus, and then you have the politicalization of a virus. Yeah. Okay. In the meantime, you have death and you have all of these other horrific things worldwide. And then you get the election years coming. So it's just more mudslinging. And then you have, George Floyd's terrible death. And then you have Black Lives Matter springing up. You have all of this. And then you have Antifa doing their thing. And then it's like everybody is losing their shit. And it's like there are dividing lines being laid down in every direction. And, I like to call it like a cultural mitosis, right? To where it's all, okay, so we're going to cut it this way and cut it that way. And then, every time you hang out or you talk with family, a new topic comes up. And this is right off the heels of Me Too was just getting its steam, and some justice was being served. And then, it's like everything was so crazy. And then you have that. And at the same time, people are being told to be afraid of each other, be afraid to go outside, be afraid to be together. And I understand, it's like we have a virus. There's an issue.
And also, you don't want to tour and get people sick. There was that whole.
Of course, we have.
Years.
I don't want to don't want to tour and get people sick. Can't tour. It's shut down. And so in that time, so much was going on, and I had a child in 20. So then, since he was coming, we were living out in Nashville. I moved back to California to raise him around family. So doing all of this, what is crazy about getting this music together, we would go into the studio for a week, and then we would have this refractory period of a couple of months, and so much would happen in that short couple of months that was like, okay, well, here's 5 more songs. Okay, and then we'd get together a couple months later, and it was like things kept coming. Like a bull just kept barreling through the room, and tons of death in my life and in my personal life, and lost a lot of really important people in 21. And so there was just this cataclysmic nonstop change going on. And so every time it looked like it was time to wrap it up, it was like, no, there's more.
There's more to say.
There's more. You're not done puking.
Right.
There's still a little more in there. More needs to come up. And that's really what it became.
Well, let's talk about the process for this record in particular, because normally, how do you guys write? Is it that you bring in the ideas? Does Scott bring in the ideas?
It works both ways. You know, I've brought in like complete songs, and Scott will present things to me where it's like a complete, okay, here's the music for the verse, here's music for the riff, here's music for this. But then we tend to not go too far. You know, if I have lyrics, I'll have a chorus and I'll send it to him, or I'll have verses. And we try to trade back and forth so that it really is a collaborative thing, because, you know, we're both capable of writing a lot or finishing songs and everything. But like I said earlier, it's about identity. And so we want to be careful not to do each other's jobs, you know, and like stay in your lane that way. But it really is like, when he has something, he'll send it to me, and then I'll just sit and I'll chew on it for a little bit. Like, what does this need to be? Do I even like it? You know? Same thing when I'll send stuff to him. He'll be like, yeah, I don't know, man. That just sounds like the Jay Buchanan solo song. I don't know if that's for us.
And you had to get in the studio. You actually created 2 records, right? So ultimately, and I think Darkfighter, but you have another record that's going to come out, I believe, like sometime later this year too.
Maybe
right?
in October, but I mean, it's going to be in the fall.
Okay.
It's going to be in the fall, and we're working to figure out when that's going to come out, because there's a lot to it. You know, there's a big team, everything from everybody working at the label, worldwide, you know, distributors, and then all of that. But sometime in the late fall.
Well, let's break down this record in particular. It's a monster record, like I was talking about to you so before you came on. Just some of the songs lyrically, there's a lot to kind of draw upon. So ultimately, I think that one of the songs I wanted to talk to you about, which was a song that you touched base on, is the last song on the record, right? It's about sort of your, you know, the deaths that you were just mentioning, and the fentanyl opioid crisis, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about that and sort of what was behind that for you.
Well, this is a tough one. Like my like ride or die dude, you know, his name was Ryan, and we grew up together as like my best friend, family man, great dude, very dependable, very trustworthy. You know, he's the guy that would, if I was out on the road, I'd be like, hey man, can you cruise by and just go check in on my parents or whatever, like always. He had an injury, you know, some years ago, had an injury and got a prescription. So like a back injury. And before that he had a knee surgery, but it's the textbook thing, really. Really good dude, has an injury, gets prescribed these pills, painkillers, and isn't given an exit strategy. He's got to take them so that he can keep going to work, provide for his family. A little bit becomes a little bit more. And then next thing you know, the prescription runs out, and the prescription's over, black market, and then it becomes, well, they're not driving anymore. You know, that the person you know is not at the wheel. And so you watch this like slow motion decay. And the person that you know they're just not there anymore. Their family, everything. It's like all of us. I think that when you watch that decline, you begin mourning as soon as you know that's going on. And so you mourn for years as they just slip further and further into darkness, you know, and they aren't themselves. But I was going through a period when, for the first time, he wasn't answering my calls. It's like, man, what is it? And when someone you love is an addict, anytime you get a text message, anytime you hear from him, that's a good.
Yeah.
Anytime, just to know, because you're thinking like you walk around with the fucking sword of Damocles hanging over you, and you never know when it's going to drop. And so I think that you begin mourning that way. But for him, there was this period of when I couldn't get a hold of him, and that's what prompted that song Dark Side. And I'm really not one to write songs that are so negative, that are so dark that way. But that's really what it was. It's, the lyrics, it just says, because he was keeping it secret. He didn't tell me until he was a couple years in. And when shit started hitting the fan, he texted me. He's like, hey, here's what's up. Wait, what? You're addicted to, all of this stuff. And
you lost 2 other friends too. I think the song was about.
Yeah. But I mean, that one specifically was for him because I couldn't get a hold of him. And when a person chooses, the lyrics say, there are no promises to keep anymore now that you've gone to the dark side. And, the deceit and having to keep it secret, the lyrics, definitely lend themselves to that. But no, I lost, another friend, fentanyl, and he had struggled with it. And these are 3 of my very closest friends, from a young age. And then, my other friend, Ty, he overdosed, and he had been in and out for years. So that wasn't as much of a shocker. He had almost gone a couple of times. But it was still difficult, to watch him go. But my other friend was killed in a homicide down out of nowhere. And one of the best people ever, friends from the time we were about 7 years old. And his name was Henry Valdez, and he was from Fontana, but he lived out in Orange County. And out of nowhere, it was on my birthday, his sister and I was playing a music festival up in Telluride, the Telluride Fest. It was my birthday. I woke up thinking like, all right. His sister texts me and says like, hey, want to talk about Henry. I'm like, what? So we get on the phone and he's dead. And it turns out, like, it made national news. There was a PGA golfer down in Cobb County, just outside of Atlanta, that was also shot. But on the news, you see that there was like a white Ram 1500 that was high centered, I think, on the 6th hole, over a sand trap. And this PGA golfer had investigated, like, what's up? Why is there a truck out on the thing? So he went there, and there was some dude. He shot the golfer, and then the golfer was found, and it made headlines because it's
of course, yeah,
a famous golfer, but in such an odd homicide. But in the trunk was one of my best friends, Henry, along with his business partner. They were executed.
Wow.
So that was just like a crazy thing.
God. Yeah.
Just crazy stuff, like somebody that I love so much. He was supposed to be there with me in Telluride, and I had begged him like, oh, come on. He's like, well, I got to take care of this thing in Atlanta, but and so that was just a wild. There's the case is still ongoing for that, in the trial. But yeah, it was just really traumatic to lose somebody that you love so much that was just so good.
Of course.
In
a way, maybe it's a healing, though, to write about it and, put it out there in the world.
I don't know. It hurts so much when you get that, deaths like that in your life. They feel much more traumatic. Whereas overdoses, suicides, different things like that, you deal with them in different ways. But I think Henry was really difficult, But all in all, like losing 3 pillars of my life in, the span of 6 months, it turns into one of those things where that it's happening and you can rationalize it and like what is. So there's no fight there. But I think that you get into this zone where it's like your grief muscle just gets sprained and you just don't know how to grieve.
Desensitized a little bit.
Yeah, you just get desensitized, and you're aware of it, and you're just going like, well, I don't know. I'm not going to focus on it too much because grief has its own process. There's a slow drip, and it presents itself to you. If you got to have a breakdown, it comes. It comes in its own time.
Yeah. On a brighter note, actually, literally my favorite song on the record, though, Bright Lights, which is a great track, sort of about the reclamation of identity. Yeah. And I think, again, it's sort of a juxtaposition to Mirrors, which is the first song on the record. Mm-hmm. By the time this comes out, the record will have dropped right around here. So talk to me about Bright Lights, which is an amazing single. Hopefully it'll be a single. One of the better songs on the record, I think.
I would love for it to be a single. And, Scott my partner, Scott Holiday, and we were just on the phone handling some business while I was on my way up here to meet with you. And we were saying, man, it seems like every time I play the album for somebody new, somebody else goes, oh, well, that song's a single, right? No, we're not sure, And so that's really good to hear that you feel that way about Bright Light. That's a song that we love.
Yeah, because talking about the sort of the meaning behind the song, because again, if you put that next to Mirrors, there's a sort of a interesting concept between
certainly both. Mirrors is just about that, the identity being lost, and you recognize that in Mirrors the lyrics say, I lost my sight so slowly that I didn't even know that I was going blind. And then with Bright Light, it's very much, it's about being rescued. It's about catching it. It's about the nosedive, the plane in the nosedive that pulls up just at the last second, and then the John Williams string music kicks in, Indiana Jones style, But like Bright Light was much more about like recognizing where you were. It says, I never noticed I was treating myself so bad. Hanging out on the line, but I was a victim of a victimless crime, because it was just when it's you that's making the mistake, you're the only one that sees it, and you're the only one paying the price. So, but then the chorus says, bright is the light I see, and the ship will come my way, out to rescue me, and here comes the one that I know, and the flag is waving high, and I can see it with new eyes. It for me, with all of the heavy content on this album, to have a song where I get to sing that, I'm really looking forward to having that mantra, on my tongue every night, and therefore in the ears of the people that come to see us. Yeah, I'm stoked that you like that song.
Yeah, it's great. Do you prefer this process of recording where you take your time? Obviously, there was a pandemic, so it led to 2 records and a couple of years in making of this record, but in terms of just getting in there in the studio and just banging it out and coming out with a record, a song a day, versus really taking your time and taking a couple of years to record a record, which process do you, when you reflect back on it, do you kind of prefer?
Well, I think that you're going to get different results from a different approach, certainly. And but I think at this point, creatively going for the latter, it just seems to fit much more, reflecting, because on the early records, when you get in there and just throw it together, well, you can make something hooky, but I just look at it and I made, the band made a lot of great music, like on the Pressure and Time record, a song like White Noise. I think that's probably one of our best songs.
Definitely.
White Noise or Face of Light. Those are really, really good tracks. But then they don't always come together that way, and then you find yourself just really, really trying to squeeze water out of a rock. And then you have the pressure of going, I need to do this. But then I would find myself in the position going like, this isn't art. I don't want to do it this way. I don't want to put myself under this stress anymore. I've done it enough times. So sitting back and there being some breathing room for contemplation and qualifying whether or not it's a statement that you want to make at all, sometimes it'll take me a long time to write a song. There's one song on Lightbringer that I had worked on for 3 years, and then I brought it to Scott, and then we worked on it for 3 more years.
Wow.
4
years in the making.
Yeah, so it's like, it works that way. Yeah. But like all things end up being born and surviving the way that they need to as part of like a, Darwinian survival of the fittest sort of a thing. For this record, or these 2 records, even though we parsed it into 2 collections, a lot of songs died, huge proponent of creative abortion, like when you know that it's not working, it's okay. Just lay it down. Just kill it. And it's okay. You can take things that you like and all of that and just put it to rest. Don't overwork it to try to make it work. If it's not flowing, it's okay to just let it go, because it wouldn't have survived in the way that would have been healthy anyways.
Well, it's a fantastic record, so I'm excited for the whole world to hear it fairly soon. You're embarking on this tour coming up.
Yeah.
I think there's some dates with Greta Van Fleet coming up. You excited about the tour? Let's talk a little bit about the tour.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to play with Greta Van Fleet. It's always fun to play with those guys, and they put on a great show. And their audience is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
They're a similar audience, I would imagine, too.
Yes. They've just done a great thing. Their approach, watching them play live and getting to know them a little bit. It's great to see people having a good time making this certain style of rock music, and from the outfits to their set design, like, man, they're just going all the way. I love to see it. And, but we're also going out to do our headlining run, and that's going to be, I don't know, late May. And I don't know if all of the dates have been announced for that yet, but we're going to be doing that. We've got to go over to Europe. We've got a bunch of festivals coming up.
By the way, the last tour you got hit by COVID really hard.
Oh, my God.
So this is, hopefully that won't happen again to you.
Yeah, I mean, we've done some touring since then, but over this last year, when we first started jumping out in 2021, it was a really harrowing experience. And with COVID moving through the entire band and the whole camp, and I had watched all of my friends, they just canceled their tours. They just stopped. Sorry, we got to roll up the doors and go home, because you lose your ass financially. But what we did on that Pressure and Time tour is we lost our asses, but we stayed on the road. We stayed on the road because we wanted to play music.
Luckily, you had like a drum roadie who was able to fill in.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
Not usual, but
we had a guitar tech who's actually a great drummer, and so he filled in. And then, we had to, play hopscotch with the techs backstage, but we made it work, thankfully. But yeah, that was a real beat down. But I think we finished out here in Orange County for that show, and the feeling that you get on that last show, when everybody was telling you to hang your guns and to just cut bait and go home. Halfway through the tour of not doing it and just hanging in there, I've never experienced a feeling like that. Even though it was a bloodbath, in a time when we could not afford it. We still made it work. And that feeling of not giving up and being able to finish at home.
Yeah, and I don't think people know how expensive it is to be on the road at this point for bands. A lot of bands, just reading something that Godsmack was touring in South America, and they couldn't actually afford to stay on the road out there. It's just way too expensive. This
is a reality. Yeah. In Europe, like for us, we're staring down the barrel of a European tour right now, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to make it work, because inflation has changed everything.
Yeah.
It's changed everything. And it's not as if it was like incredibly profitable in the first place, but now it's damn near impossible. But we're going to do it because it's music, and we're musicians. We have to play. It's not just about money. We're providers. We have families. We have to make money, but we also have, I've got a very deep need to play music. I have to play music. I started doing this before there was any money in it. And then crashed on couches and did it, for next to nothing for a long time.
Yeah. By the way, you've toured with almost every major rock band in the whole world. I don't think there's anyone you haven't toured with. So any of your best memories that when you reflect back on those tours, whether it be Guns N' Roses, the Stones, there's so many bands that you play with.
Well, I know this for sure. We've played with Aerosmith a bunch of times. And I hung out with Steven Tyler and talked with him.
Greatest.
And he gave me he just said some very, very nice things to me, and to hear those things from someone as iconic, and when I was playing coffee shops as a teenager, I'd play Dream On and all of that stuff. And, to have that experience, and I won't share those words, here, because it would just, I'd look like a real asshole. But like he just said some very nice things to me that I will never forget. Experiences like that. One of my favorite bands to ever tour with. I mean, you know, we toured a long time with Black Sabbath, and that was incredible. The Rolling Stones, and
by the way, I can't even imagine, because you got to perform a lot, the Sabbath and Bentley in front of Sabbath. That has to be daunting when you're playing Sabbath songs.
I think
in front of Sabbath.
I don't think daunting is the word, because like we had already played with them and toured with them where it felt like a family affair. It didn't feel daunting at all. You know, apples to apples. I'll put Rival Sons up against that. Not me, the band.
Yeah.
I'll put those guys in the ring with anybody.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter who it is. But it felt great to be able to honor those guys, you know, to honor them. Another one of my favorite touring experiences ever was getting to tour with Queens of the Stone Age, and that's one of the best bands out there, just period, one of the very best bands. But then Deep Purple. Touring with Deep Purple was probably the funnest tour ever. Just a really, really great time.
Amazing. Well, we always talk about, at the end of the show, your 5 things that we like to go over. So if you had to say, Jay, your top 5 live bands of all time, who would they be?
Top 5 live bands. The Refused, a punk band. I would say, and this is funny, because I don't listen to this band, but we played with them one time, and then I got it. Kiss.
I would agree, by the way.
Yeah, and I'm not a Kiss. That's not
put
not
on
me.
An incredible show.
Yeah, it's the vaudeville aspect of it. I finally understood when I was out in Italy and I walked in the audience, saw all these kids with their faces painted, going like,
I get it.
I get it. I know why they're here. But let's see them. I would say I saw a band in L.A. years and years ago. They broke up immediately because they were too wild. But that was a band called Beauty School. So they're dead and gone. A band, one of the very, very, very best live bands I've ever seen, ever, was a band out of New Orleans. And they were called the Pleasure Club. James Hall with the Pleasure Club. James Hall is still doing his thing, you know, down there in Georgia and New Orleans. But the Pleasure Club was an incredible band. And they have a record that you can look up. It's called Here Comes the Trick. This is an amazing, amazing album. So, but I think they broke up, and so it just never came to fruition. But that was in the early 2000s. Another live band that is incredible to me would be the Rolling Stones. That's
still
like
doing it. Still great.
Well, it's like they wrote the book, so they literally wrote the book on the whole. They wrote the book on the genre, and they're still out there doing it. And when we got to meet those guys, and I got to meet Mick Jagger. I'm talking with him. His like youthful energy is scary.
Scary.
It's scary.
Yeah.
Like all of this doesn't add up, but it's very obviously authentic. Very obviously just as authentic as it gets. But it's weird. It's wonderful. I don't mean to say like weird.
Well, June 2nd, the record Darkfighter comes out. I'm excited for the whole world to hear this. And then later on in the year, Lightbringer. Check you guys out on tour, rivalsons.com. It's been a pleasure. So happy to sit with you. One of the greatest voices today. So,
I appreciate that, Scott. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. And check you guys out on tour. Hope to see you again soon, Jay. Appreciate it.
Thanks, bud.
Thanks again.